Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's This Can Happen Insights. My name is Sinclair. I'm one of the founders and director of This Can Happen. I am delighted to welcome many of you back to one of these insights, and also to any new people that are joining us for the first time. So before I introduce our guest speaker today, that you can see on your screen, just a few logistics about how this will work. I hope to have a conversation with our guests for about 15-20 minutes, but really welcome you to send in any questions or comments that you have to contribute to the discussion. So on the right hand side of your screen, you should be able to see a control panel. If for any reason the control panel has closed, you'll probably be able to see an orange little box with a white horizontal arrow in it. If you click on that, it will open up your control box and you should be able to see a question box. Please use that question box to send in any questions, any comments, anything that you want. You can even just come and say hello to me now, just so I can reassure you you've got the right place. The questions are completely anonymous. No one in the audience can see what you are writing, only I can, and I won't call out your name unless you specifically say that you want me to. So please use that to express how you're feeling, to ask any questions. If you are watching this, the recording of this, unfortunately you're not able to send in questions during the recording. Okay, so without further ado, it gives me really great pleasure to introduce to you Chris Seel from Harvey Nash. She's a director at the global recruitment company. Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And we are here today because your company launched a mental health survey recently called Mental Health at the Crossroads, that you sent out to thousands and thousands of people and got some really interesting data back. So it would be great if you just tell us a little bit about the survey, who it went out to, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the survey, so we're a technology talent business, technology recruitment talent business. So primarily the survey will have gone out to technologists globally. It went out in two sections, actually. There's it went out initially as part of a technology survey that we do once annually, and then we did a COVID specific survey just to see how things had changed between now and then, and I think that was probably where some of the most insightful information has come back from.
First of all, mental health in itself is very personal to you.
Yes.
So why for you was this survey so important?
Yeah, so mental health has always been, well, it's always been, that's not necessarily true, but certainly for the last decade, my own mental health has been something that that has been problematic, deeply problematic at times, and other times less so, but it has always been something that I've been sort of battling with, and on what a lot of people use at the moment, that phrase, a journey, which I try and avoid, but it seems to enter into every statement I make. But yeah, so about just under 10 years ago, I was at a point of a real personal low, and it meant that I was personally close to suicide. I mean, I'd made what might be defined as a suicidal attempt, but that was, I suppose, a defining moment for me, and from then on I've just been on a bit of a quest to figure out myself, with the help of some great therapists and counsellors along the way, but also to try and raise awareness of this as a subject, and certainly more latterly that's been a real focus area of mine, just to help people understand that what they're going through is something that is potentially and hopefully entirely fixable, but also that it's not something that is just theirs, that it's something that many other people share. So that's why it's very important personally to me. There is a professional side to that as well. As I mentioned, organizationally, we are part of the supply of talent into businesses, and I don't believe you can, or we should do that unless you have an interest and therefore a care for people. And I think organisations are getting increasingly sophisticated at appealing to people's emotions when they employ them. So, you know, when we employ people nowadays, we ask for their passion. You know, we use fairly emotive terms, and we make sure that their job forms a really important part of their life and their existence. And so if we're asking for that sort of emotional commitment from our employees, then we really ought to be working hard at looking after their emotional well-being as we would their physical health. So I think it's twofold for me.
Okay, so getting to the kind of the findings of your survey, do you want to kind of pinpoint, you know, any particularly, you know, any headlines that you would like to comment on?
Yeah, I think there's a few really interesting insights actually. So I think at the very, very top level, you know, there's the very strong figure around 1 in 3 people's mental health has deteriorated during that time period, which might not feel like a big number, but if you consider it, you know, it really is. It's you know, this pandemic has had a big effect on a very large volume of people. If you consider normally, you know, some of the numbers banded around a sort of 1 in 6 people or 1 in 8, depending on the survey, suffer with mental health issues at any time. 1 in 3 struggling with their well-being right now is high. So I think that sets the scene, I think, quite nicely, and hopefully brings this to the fore and shows business leaders that this is something that is very real and is happening to a large proportion of their workforce. I think some of the other things that sort of leapt out for me were around what people were potentially doing to fix their own problems, and what is very clear is that people are looking to quite personal channels first and foremost to fix things, which I think is great, but I think it probably shows you know, a degree of immaturity around the process. So the survey suggests that most people are going to things like exercise or hobbies, where they are talking to people, they're talking to family and friends, you know, even things like buying pets and stuff featured quite highly, and they were all actually, interestingly enough, they featured far higher than talking to a professional. And as I say, I think there's validity in all of those activities, but I do wonder if that's people turn to those things because they are not quite in a place yet where they turn to more formal help channels to work through some of these problems. So again, I think maybe businesses can be doing more to promote some of those formal channels so that people can take those things on, and hopefully make some improvements in their own lives.
Okay, so we can come back to some other headlines, but I think one thing I wanted to ask you is, do you think you would have had the same response to this survey if the world hadn't been going through what we've been through?
I don't think in any way we would have had the same response, actually, by numbers of responses, certainly not by the content of some of that response. So I think one of the interesting facts that came through was the percentage of people that were being confronted with their mental health issues for the first time. So I think 35% of the respondents said that this is of those that felt their mental health was deteriorating. 35% of those people, this was the first time they'd engaged with a personal mental health issue. And again, that's a really high number. And actually, those people it's probably one of the scariest points for those people right now, because perhaps someone like me who's had 10 years of coming in and out of mental health issues and having a whole bunch of tools and techniques and people that I can go to and make some positive changes in my life fairly quickly. If this was my first time I'd gone through this and we were working remotely, you know, that potentially is quite quite a scary thought, or certainly one that we, the business community, need to consider. So yeah, I mean, I think the number of responses were high because this is something that is on people's agenda right now, and the content is probably more charged than we'll probably find it another time.
And I couldn't help but notice that when you posted on LinkedIn about the research, there was somebody that gave a really honest, and I think a really honest response. And I actually wrote it here because I thought this people listening will really probably resonate with it. And the reaction was, the unrelenting video calls, the pressure to prove you're working hard without being able to demonstrate it, the guilt for taking breaks, the emails at night and when you wake up, the constant fear you're not doing enough to protect your job. For many, the need to provide for your family as well as school your children, the reduced pay, the economic uncertainty, the fear of your family getting ill, the uncertainty in when you'll be able to hug your parents again, or if they're still going to be with you if they get ill. There is no escape from ceaseless worry. I think that kind of summed it up, didn't it? I mean, is it a surprise that people are experiencing mental health issues for the first time during this time? I don't think it is.
No, it certainly is. I mean, and actually, when you read that, and I think this is some of the power of sharing things like that. So all credit to the person that did share that, because when you read it, as you say, you can immediately emotionally connect to that content, can't you? I mean, first time I read it, I felt anxious reading it because, you know, we've all felt. It took me to the place where I had been on a number of occasions during this period of time. Any change is difficult, you know, and you know, you just need to look at Twitter for 2 minutes at the moment to feel like the world is, you know, is sort of imploding around you, and it's, you know, it's scary. There's no wonder people are experiencing anxiety. So I think us helping people find some coping mechanisms for dealing with those problems, and also us saying, look, so many people are going through exactly the same thing that you are. So, and it is okay, and it's actually right now it's perfectly normal to be going through those things. So, you know, that it is worth dedicating some of your time to trying to fix those things rather than, you know, in yourself, by the way, not fix the problems because they're unfixable, but fix them in yourselves. It's a really good use of your time right now to dedicate it to that, because that long list, for example, that long list that chap shared feels, you know, where would I have time to do anything else around all of this worry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you spoke about obviously the main area that you deal with is in tech.
Yes.
And do you find, what do you think, obviously we've got people on this call from tech industries as well as many others. Do you think the tech industry has more of a mental health issue tendency than others, or and what can others learn from the tech industry?
I think our survey looks specifically at some of the breakdown of disciplines within the tech space and looks at who is struggling more currently, but it sort of compares people from specifically within the sector. So I don't know how it compares more broadly speaking. I guess, you know, I'm in recruitment as much as I am, if not more than I am in technology, and all of the themes are still absolutely prevalent. So I guess the theme transcends sector and work type and all sorts of stuff. I would say that, you know, the areas that our survey found that people were most struggling were things you probably would expect to a degree. So the permanent marketplace was probably less stressed than the contract marketplace currently. There's an awful lot of uncertainty around contract marketplace. You know, an awful lot of businesses have taken the action of removing contractors to protect finances short term. So I feel like there's a number of people who will be contractors who will either be worried about not being employed right now or worried about when their next gig may come up. So that makes sense around that statistic. And then if you look at the specific disciplines, project and program management and IT operations are areas that under the highest levels of stress from what we found out from the survey. And again, both of those areas have been probably asked to do two things. One is mobilize the workforce very quickly. So there's been an awful lot of pressure put on them to be part of the solution in sort of super quick time. And the other thing is, and I know this is prevalent within the project space, having spoken to a lot of program managers, project managers over the last couple of months, the businesses are asking program teams, project teams, IT teams, more generally speaking, to deliver more with less money. So their sort of work stresses, that's the reality of the work that they have on currently. If you then take into account they're trying to do this remotely, possibly with families around them or possibly not, and so they're suffering from loneliness and those sorts of things. It's a broad issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you and I spoke previously, and you talked about the tech industry hasn't fallen apart because people are dispersed and working in their homes, and so that's called into question how people are going to carry on working, and they're probably not all going to go back to work. So what around, I think you talked about that mental health maturity on a physical level as opposed to how we look after them when we can't see them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think this is a point where all businesses will have to consider how they look after people's well-being in an increasingly, with an increasingly remote workforce. So we're talking to clients now, and they're starting to say to us, it is less important that people are in the office 5 days a week, and actually, in some instances, that is, they can be in the office once every 3 weeks, which is fantastic. Everybody loves a bit of flexibility, right? But certainly from my personal experience, a lot of the times when we have spotted within our own organisation people who are starting to struggle, that has been, starting to spot a little bit of erratic behaviour, or them talking to you over lunch or on a walk or whatever it may be. What seems to happen when you move to a more remote working pattern, the meetings, firstly, the meetings have quite a hard start and an end. They're all remote, so you could probably pull yourself together for an hour's meeting, and put on a mask and be someone else, regardless of what's kind of going on under the surface. So there's that opportunity that goes, and a lot of the small talk parts of the working day disappear. People aren't necessarily going on to a Teams or a Zoom or a GoToMeeting to have a quick lunchtime catch up. It's almost, businesses almost have to put some of those, and I know organisations are doing this around mental health working groups or coffee groups or whatever it may be, but businesses are going to have to start constructing some of those sort of artificial environments that will take the place of the water cooler conversation or the kitchen chat, so that people can share how they feel, and we can make sure that we're picking up people when they're right at the early stages of suffering.
Yeah, great. There's lots of questions coming in, so sorry if my eyes are going in the other direction. So before I get to the questions, and there's just another thing that I want to touch on, whether from your findings from the survey or your own thoughts on teams and leadership styles.
Yeah.
And do we need to, or do leaders need to be doing things differently?
Yeah, I do. I think leaders do need to be doing things differently. I think they need to be really thinking. It's not a simple lift and shift. What worked when we were physically in the office 5 days a week, almost certainly will not work moving forwards in many different areas, but very specifically looking at well-being. So communication is more important than ever. We all know that during times of uncertainty, long periods of silence are incredibly stressful. Now, organizations can't disclose everything, especially not at the moment, but if you look at some of the primary reasons in the survey for people feeling unwell, the top reasons are having no time to personally switch off, the worry of losing my job, you know, working on a complex project, executives setting unrealistic targets. Businesses can't fix everything, and leaders can't fix all of those things. They can't stop it being uncertain, but they can remove some of those stresses, so that people aren't dealing with all of those things. That huge list that chap mentioned on my LinkedIn feed, you know, as a business leader, I read that and I thought, I wonder what I could take away from that person to make that list less scary. Can't remove it all because some stuff is immovable, but I do think leaders ought to be looking at some of that sort of stuff and thinking, am I contributing to the stress of the moment? And yeah, I think at the top of an organization, actually, that should be a conversation that's going on in talent teams, and then organizations should be training their people on just that, on the leadership of the future.
Great. Okay. I'm going to go to some of the questions now. Some really interesting things coming through here. So it says here, Emma Russell, senior lecturer in occupational and organisational psychology, stresses that online video conferencing tools impose additional stressful emotional labour on employees as they concentrate on their own on-screen reactions and those of colleagues. She recommends new codes of social etiquette that may include turning off video during conferences so people don't feel the need to constantly regulate their behaviour. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So I understand that at a personal level. So one of my personal hang-ups has always been a visual one. You know, I don't like mirrors. So when I'm in a hairdresser's, I really can't bear looking at myself when I'm having my hair cut. So sitting on a Zoom call or a go-to meeting, looking at my own face talking all day is not how I would choose to exist, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, look, I think that's really valid, and a lot of businesses actually have gone the other way. In the first instance, a lot of businesses have had a camera on rule to try and promote personal interaction, but actually, I think, you know, I do think businesses need to consider the person, you know, a person by person impact. That maybe that isn't the appropriate rule actually. Then maybe we ought to have a, you know, keep your camera on if you want, but if you don't, you know, absolutely keep it off. I think that's a really valid point.
Although it makes it even harder, doesn't it? It's weighing up how to look after your staff and how to check in with them, and you know that there is such a thing as that old-fashioned phone as well. And I think everybody has to remember this in whatever capacity, whether it's a Zoom, whether it's phone, whether it's face to face, we can all wear masks.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's about educating everyone to sort of see how we can break down those masks if need be.
Yeah, and I think people hide, even when you're in the office 5 days a week, hide what's really going on. So there wasn't a silver bullet before, and there won't be a silver bullet now that sorts this out for everybody. But I do think some real thought and some real consideration into it is important. You're right, and I think a lot of organisations are now talking about this blended model where they will be flexible, but the power of being together, it won't be for some of the old-fashioned reasons like monitoring the workforce. It will be to make sure that, you know, you have the culture you want, that, you know, people get the socializing that they need to have. So having, you know, flexibility, but days where you come into the office to be together, that's probably the right blend, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you were talking about accessing external support, and just going back to that, somebody has said the importance of accessing expert support cannot and should not be underestimated. What do you think are the most appropriate ways of employers supporting so many of their staff can access this?
Yeah, great question. And honestly, I think this is something that, you know, organisationally we're on a journey with ourselves at the moment, and we're looking at. Most businesses, from what I can tell, have a similar sort of level of support where, you know, you sort of work through the HR channels, and then you have some access to phone-based counselling, which, you know, may or may not work for most people. There are some great tools available now, actually, that mean that you don't necessarily have to go and physically see a therapist in the first instance. There is there are therapy online tools that businesses can buy for the enterprise. So each employee would have a login and then would be able to go and either access some advice that's very personalized to what is happening to them, that is from professionals. And if that doesn't work, then there's a sort of following tier of a more face-to-face. So I think, yeah, honestly, I'm not sure I know the exact answer to that question, and I think we're looking at that at the moment. But I do echo the thoughts and the sentiment that professional help is, honestly, professional help saved my life. So I'm a firm believer that it's something that we all should have easier access to.
Okay, great. Okay, somebody has said, right, really interesting discussion. Thank you both. And thank you very much, Chris, for being so open about your own mental health challenges. I've worked in PR and comms for nearly 20 years, working for big organisations like Sky and Camelot and smaller agencies and charities. In this time, I've seen a few good managers, but most of them have been poor, especially at managing staff's mental health. Here's my question. What one thing could managers do to help look after their staff's mental health now and in the future?
Yeah. So I think that's a big question, isn't it? Okay. But I think the first thing that people can do as a leader is stop being scared of it as a topic. It's the thought of your employees being stressed, is petrifying, because it has productivity related fear, it has litigious fear, and I'm pretty sure that stops people from engaging with it as a topic because it feels too big for them to tackle. So I think first and foremost, I think not being fearful of it and having it as something that is within your gift to work with your employees on, and is important. And then I think organizationally, actually, but from the top of the business, they should be helping leaders with that maze. It shouldn't necessarily be down to the leader to decide what they can and cannot say and do. I think businesses need to think much harder around what their organizational policy is, whether that's using things that are available like mental health first aid, which is a great concept, helping leaders get some sort of experience in leading around this subject matter. For me, I feel like I can tackle this with authenticity, because I've been through stuff myself. Whether that makes me good or bad at it, I don't know, but it removes some of the fear. If I hadn't been through this before and I suddenly had to tackle what I thought was a mental health issue with an employee, that feels like one hell of a scary topic to just go for off the cuff without any organizational help, training, permission even. So I think there's two elements to it. I think businesses need to help people, and then people need to see it actually as a core part of their role as a leader, and try and remove some of the fear that comes with it as a topic.
I think I actually think you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to that fear. I think it is, and people are worried about saying the wrong thing, or worried about saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, or not enough, or too much. And so I think that is a really good point. I think we've seen already, just in this half an hour, that, and as we at This Can Happen know, this is a huge topic and can't be solved in half an hour. But it's about employees, both leaders and people throughout the organisation, just being aware to try and enable these conversations, because the more conversations we have, the more people won't be fearful. And I think that's the most important thing, and therefore hopefully the stats in surveys like yours will not be as high and not be so alarming, because better cultures will have been created in organisations. So thank you so much for your time today. I presume the survey and the results are on the Harvey Nash website?
They are, yeah.
Great. I believe they're on the This Can Happen website as well. So if anybody wants to actually see the report and all the findings, please do have a look. But thank you everybody for joining us today, and special thanks to Chris for sharing everything with us and having such a great discussion. So thank you for your time today, everyone, and go and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.